Hello everybody, welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Flynn and I'm here with the fantastic Jeremy Lord. What's up, Jeremy?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm really good. It's really funny, before the stream we were chatting about we're going to be doing some pixel art today. Your camera is pixelating at the moment, which is perfectly on brand. So I stole your joke from before the stream to make myself look good, but we can hear you all good as well. It comes in and out, so
Awesome.
we'll be fine. What's up, everybody in chat? Welcome. Thanks for joining us. This is part one of a two-part stream that we're doing this week. So today's Tuesday here in Australia. It might be Monday night where you are if you're in the US or somewhere else around the world. So this is part one, and we've got part two. We've got live chat happening here as well. Manny's here from Philly. What's up, Manny? Ma is here as well. Johanna's looking after us in chat. Great to hear from you, and let us know where you're from if you're tuning in. Jeremy and I are both from Sydney, Australia. Yeah, we're going to hang out. If you're over on YouTube, you can comment over there as well if you're watching the live. But the main chat that we're using is Behance, but we'll keep an eye on YouTube as well. If you've got any questions as we're rolling along. Pixel art is such an interesting thing, and I love that, Jeremy, the main core of your work, which we'll have a look at in a second, isn't around pixel art, but you've done all this stuff with pixel art that's I think you did a video with Adobe at one point. It has millions and millions of views or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a super fun thing to work with, and yeah, it's not quite sort of where my kind of heart lives, but thematically and kind of its spirit, it's totally down with where I kind of like to steer my art. So it completely fits, and it's a completely different way of working. It's always a super fun one to do, and actually pretty straightforward too.
Yeah, which is really cool, because I remember the beginning of that journey of you starting to do pixel art stuff. So we'll take we'll take the audience along that journey with you as well. I remember you stepping out of your comfort zone, trying something a little bit new. So if you're an illustrator, even if you're not an illustrator, feel free to ask questions as we're rolling along. Enough about that. Let's look at some of your work, get an idea of what we're talking about. Look at all this color.
Yeah, so color is one of the big things. I'm a bit of an 80s child, so I love always working with kind of neons and very bright poppy colors. That kind of flows well into kind of cyberpunk. What I like to kind of say is it's kind of neon cyberpunk, and then all of that kind of wrapped into a Japanese kind of packaging. So I'm a big fan of anime as well. So I like to kind of work with all those kind of retro colors, but in an anime kind of style, as you can see. But every now and then I'll go full retro and kind of gaming. I'm a big gamer as well, and kind of do this kind of pixel art. So we've got all these kind of health pots. So I thought I would talk a little bit today about how to create a kind of a gaming scene for. I'm pretty pumped about the Love and Thunder, the Thor Love and Thunder movie coming out.
Yeah,
actually, I think it is out already. I haven't seen it yet, so no spoilers, please. But yeah, so I'll just kind of show a few things around kind of pixel art, how to kind of manage your brushes and your workspace in Photoshop to create pixel art. It's super straightforward. And then we'll look at kind of pattern making and tiles and character creation and all the kind of the bells and whistles that will go with creating a side scroller 16-bit kind of, platform video game kind of scene. And yeah, that should probably cover us for both days.
That's cool. That's cool. I'm very excited. Yeah, lots of stuff that I like as well. Quite a gamer when I can find the time to get in there. And yeah, I'm super keen for the movie as well. Reiterating no spoilers, because I also haven't seen it. I'm always super far behind in watching things these days, so it's almost impossible to avoid spoilers on the internet. So
It is, yeah, and you get them just scrolling on social media or whatever, and it's just something comes up, and you're like, well, now I know a thing I'm not supposed to know.
Yeah, there's a thumbnail of some big thing happening. They're ending explained, and you're like, man, come on, I didn't. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about pixel art. So what's the weapon of choice for pixel art?
So literally just your brush, right? So one of the things that Photoshop does super well is you got your standard brush. So if I'm using, I'll make a new non-pixel art kind of thing here. Sorry, what's going on here? Sorry, there we go. That was interesting. Here we go.
It's always interesting when we're streaming.
Yeah, always the live things. This is one of the good things as well. Like I'm using a Wacom Cintiq here to kind of do this, so you can see I'm kind of getting nice kind of clean lines. But your standard brush just kind of allows you to do nice clean lines. And if you kind of zoom in, because this is where we're going like quantum here, and getting right into the pixels, and you'll see that what Photoshop does when you kind of draw with it, enhance. Is it will smooth things down for you, make stuff look a lot smoother. But we don't want that for pixel art. We want the nice kind of jagged edge. So what we're actually going to use is the pencil right here, and that's going to give us that jagged edge. So it's not something that a lot of people use because it is very kind of jaggedy, and you can see that line is kind of quite hectic there. It's not smooth like the other one, but for pixel art, it's bang on what we want. So we've got the brush set at 5 pixels wide, but if I bring it down to 1, you can see that I'm literally just painting with pixels. And that's basically it. The only other thing that we really need to do here is make sure that our eraser tool is also set in mode. So there is no pencil eraser. You have to do that in the mode. And the mode here is going from brush. So brush will erase much like the brush did before, but if I switch that to pencil, I will actually erase nice clean cut pixels out of that. So that's basically like my entire setup before I get into pixel art. In terms of like brushes, is just making sure that I am on the pen tool and that my eraser tool is also on, sorry, the pencil tool, not the pencil, and my eraser is also on the pencil tool. And then I can go to town with all of this. So one of the things that you'll notice here is if I go to 100%, my image is quite small. Yeah. Right. Because obviously we're working with pixel art. The whole point of kind of 16-bit or 8-bit or any of those 64-bit is, not a lot of memory back in those days. So not a lot of colors, no kind of smooth gradients, and very kind of low res images that, the consoles and computers of the day could render. That's where that style comes from. It's a necessity more than at least in its kind of origin, it's a necessity more than a kind of stylistic choice, even though nowadays it has become a stylistic choice that I'm using like this super powered machine and program to create something that is like super retro and lo-fi. Yeah. Which is a little bit backwards, but I think that's where the kind of the fun comes from. So before I get into this, I need to make one big decision, and that is, what's going to be the size of my canvas? So I've kind of done something a little bit random here. If I go into the image size of my canvas, you can see that I've got 444 pixels by 299. That's just super weird and not really to scale for anything. That's not reflective of like, that's what, like Sega or Nintendo used to use. I should probably look that up and kind of see exactly what the screen dimensions were. What I've done here is I've basically just gone and drawn and then scaled the rest of the text to this, right? And what that has been in this case is this little score indicator at the top, which we'll look at doing a little bit later on in the stream. But I've started with that from that particular scale and then scaled the rest of my scene to that, which is why I've got this kind of random thing. But if you're doing something like this, for instance, so if we're looking at like these little pots, you'll notice one of the things that kind of can happen is if I'm using like 6, then that's a 16 by 16 pixel square that this kind of potion fits in. I'm not going to have a lot of detail. If I go to 32, I've got a little bit more detail. If I go to 64, I've got even more detail. If I go full 128, there's a fine line where you start to cross maybe into when does it stop being pixel art and it just becomes kind of pixelated art. And you lose the benefit and the style that pixel art brings you, which is like you're going to have a limited amount of information and detail that you can put in there. So you need to be smart about how you draw an eye or how you draw a reflection. Like, for instance, these little sparkles on this one, they can be fully detailed. They can go, full on and basically kind of draw them as I would normally if I wasn't doing pixel art. But down here, I need to be kind of careful, like that one just becomes a square, and see kind of how that works. So there is a fine line when you're kind of doing this in terms of like, what's the size of this going to be. I'm going a little bit more detailed here. I'm going 16-bit rather than 8-bit. 8-bit's really going to be not enough detail, and I want a little bit more detail to go in here with this aesthetic. So we're going to go with 16-bit. And what you can see here is I've already created kind of a bunch of assets in here. And that's very, very simply done with a few kind of different things. So let's grab this color palette. And the color palette that I'm working from today is actually taken directly from this little kind of screenshot that I've taken from the Thor trailer.
Yeah.
And this particular scene that is obvious to kind of emulate this like side scroller, which fits completely with the aesthetic of the movie, and has that kind of 8-bit, like 16-bit side scroller kind of quality to it. So we're going to work with that, and that's what we're kind of basing this whole thing on. So I've kind of eyedropped some colors from that, and that's going to be the basic premise of our scene, right? So I've got this kind of background here. All I've done is, if I kind of hide this, I'm going to start with my kind of background color here and that one. And I make a new layer. And literally all I'm going to do is make a selection across the entire thing. And then I use Option and Command and Delete to fill. So Option, Delete will fill with my foreground color. And if I make another selection down here, Command, Delete will fill with a background color. So I could do this on a different layer. If I was working not pixel art, I probably would do these on different layers because I can control them and select them better. But the beauty of pixel art is I can use the magic wand without any of the drawbacks that sometimes it has, with kind of, starting to look at things like back in, creating our image that we looked at before here with the brush tool. If I make this line, because Photoshop is smoothing, like trying to break out this aliasing, if I use my magic wand tool on that, it's going to select some of the white with it as well, which maybe I don't want. So there's always a little bit of kind of give and take with making selections in Photoshop, because you've got all this kind of different range of pixels. Whereas in my pixel art, that doesn't happen at all because, as I've got very clean lines, I can literally just grab stuff and not have to worry at all about if it's going to grab all of it or not. So if I do this, for instance, you'll see that it's going to grab exactly the pixels that I've got. I've got no limitation in between the two. So it's really handy. You could almost do your entire artwork on a single layer, right? At least as far as kind of selections are concerned. But we're not going to do that because I'm not crazy.
Still can't give up the layers completely, right?
The layers are handy for a range of different things that you'll see coming later on.
So just a fun fact, the Game Boy original resolution was 160 by 144.
There you go. That's almost like a
tiny
square. Yeah.
Yeah. That's smaller than a Twitter profile like icon or Instagram.
And that's that kind of like greeny yellow hue where it's literally, there's no color. It's just like black and white, except it's like green scale instead of gray scale.
Yep. Back in the day.
Yep. All right. So now I need to make another kind of stylistic decision here that concerns with kind of trying to give this idea of a gradient. So what I've done here is I've just done kind of like banding to try and give this kind of sense of like a smooth transition. And again, the whole point of this is if I zoom out, you get a sense of a kind of a gradient happening. Whereas if I come in close, you obviously banding kind of going in on this. So I find that a little bit easier to use. The other big standout that you will see is what's called dithering. It's this kind of stuff, which you've probably seen happen before on certain video games, where you get
called?
this
Dithering.
Dithering, yeah. So if I bring this down to here, for instance, and kind of make this that color, you'll see that it takes on this aspect of kind of like a gradient. Again, if I zoom out, you'll see that line gets a little bit kind of blurry, and creates this effect that you can see in a range of different things. So that can be done. It's a bit annoying to do dithering, but if you are going to do it, what I would suggest is, as you can see, I've got this on a different layer. What I would suggest is this. So this is how we kind of standard kind of procedure of a very simple kind of dithering element. So we're going to start with 1, 2, 3, and then an extra one, right? So we've got this kind of idea.
Right.
And then we are going to go back to this. And then I've got a cross happening in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 there. And I'm going to need to do it over here as well, because I'm going to take that and duplicate it a little bit later on. So I should probably do this guy as well and fit it into kind of like a nice, what I want basically is for that to be kind of delineated on one side. So I get all the right repeat patterns happening everywhere. And then I can stick one in here and then another one there, which means, and I'm probably good right now. So what I would do then is the following. I would take this and duplicate it. So Command J is going to duplicate this guy, and then Command T drags him over. And I have not created a very good dithering pattern because, as you can see, it's all out of whack, because I need to move that over to here. Right? So I've got some overlap in my dithering pattern, and that's okay. That's fine. So then I can take these two. So these are my two layers that I created, 1 and 2.
Right.
And then I'm going to do Command E, and that's going to smash them together, merge them together into one. And then I can repeat the process. Basically, I'm going to double down on that every time. So now I've got 4 of my tiles. So I can take the 2 pairs, smash them together, duplicate that. So now I'm duplicating again. So you can do it like this. It takes, as you can see, it takes a little bit of time to kind of repeat this. The more you do it, the faster it gets, obviously, because you're then duplicating bigger and bigger sections. But it's still a little bit of a pain in the butt, potentially. The other thing that I could do is I could potentially try and take one of these and make it into a dithering brush, and then I can actually draw with that.
Right.
But I won't necessarily do that today. I'm making the kind of the stylistic choice of just having it be this kind of banded gradient that we've got, and that's all good. I'm pretty happy with that, right? And that again is just me, making smaller and smaller rectangular selections on these guys and spreading them out more and more to kind of create this effect of this kind of like smooth gradient. It also has this kind of 80s look as well. If you look at the kind of the old 80s sun kind of thing, it has that kind of aspect. So that's for my background. So I'm pretty happy with that as it is. Next thing is I'm going to start putting in mountains and such. So I'm going to make a new layer, call this one background. So I use always this kind of shorthand code, BKG, for me is background. So I can kind of use that. I've done that one before here, so I'm just going to eyedrop the color from that. That's, again, this is my colors that have been eyedropped directly from this particular screenshot, just to kind of get that same vibe in there. So I've got that, and then I can go to a slightly bigger brush, not too big because I want to keep it pixelated. So all I've got here is a kind of a 2 by 2.
So just jumping in, how big can the brush be until it's turns from a cube to a circle, square to a circle, cube?
Obviously 1 pixel is a square, right?
Yeah.
That's just going to be like that. 2 pixels is still going to be 2 pixels. So it's still going to be a square. As soon as you go to to, well, 3 is still a square, sorry, and then 4 goes to something that starts to resemble more of a circle from a distance. So the issue is, once you go like really big like this, you can see I'm actually making a circle, and then I'm still getting that pixelated edge, but I'm probably not going to get as much detail. So this is a bit of a trial and error phase potentially, where you can kind of see, you know, what's going to work best, what's going to give you the pixels that you want, because you want to see those pixels because it is pixel art at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But also allow you to get some semblance of detail. So I'm just going to draw in these kind of mountains as they kind of looked from that screenshot, not getting too fussed about any of this. And then I can literally just go in and make a selection on the bottom of this with my wand, and then Option Delete is going to fill the rest of that. And I've got the basic kind of premise of my background mountains. Then I am going to make a new layer, and that's going to be for my midtones. So midtones are going to make 2 kind of layers. So I'm going to eyedrop both of those, and we're going to go in and call this one mid, and do the same thing. Oops, wrong color. Here we go. Trying not to kind of, you know, obviously match up to the other mountains too much and get some of that kind of overlap, so they don't just look like a copied kind of portion of that.
Right.
That's probably a bit too much there. There we go. Get a little bit more kind of detail happening in here. And then I can just grab all of those and fill them in.
Nice. And because of that dithering thing, like as you said, like, well, not dithering thing, like the aliasing, where Photoshop's trying to figure out, well, to make it look really smooth, the difference between this color and this color is, you know, halfway between. When you just use your magic wand tool, I was half expecting, just from experience using Photoshop doing other stuff, you to have like a kind of almost transparent line around some of those selections.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't exist at all. Yeah.
No, because it is just pixel perfect, right? So there's no, when you tell Photoshop to select a thing, there's no border line here where there's the kind of like a blurred edge, because it's trying to get rid of that aliasing. So you can literally just kind of magic wand and use your paint bucket even if you want to, which is traditionally not something that you can very easily do when you're using, you know, back to our example here, for instance, if I was to fill that in, let me just inverse the selection here and fill that. You get that because Photoshop is not sure where to call out, you know, where to literally draw the line in between you selected and what's not selected. Because we have this edge happening, Photoshop's not sure of like, what do I consider blue here? Because I've got 4 different shades of blue and then a white. Right? So I've got this square, that one, that one, that one, and then that one. What do you want me to select here? How far do I go into that? That can be changed as well if you want to make bigger selections. So for instance, these 2 guys, if let me duplicate this and smash them together so that they're on the same layer, so they get selected potentially at the same time. If I right now on my magic wand, I've got my tolerance set to 1. That's as low as it'll go. And that basically means how like inclusive is my selection with slight variations of color. So at this point, it's 1, which is the lowest it can go. So it will be completely tolerant of any other color than the pixel light on with my magic wand. So anything that's not exactly this particular shade of purple will not get selected. If I boost that up to 30, for instance, and I make my selection, it's still not doing it. That's a bit of a problem.
What did it do then?
Oh, there we go. Right.
Yeah.
So now, even though I'm clicking on this purple pixel, it's actually selecting also these ones, because it's tolerant enough to go, these guys are similar enough that I'm going to include them in the same selection. So generally speaking, when I'm using my magic wand doing pixel art, I just keep my tolerance down to 1, because I just want to select the pixels that I want to select. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does for
Cool.
sure. Just going to shout out just a question from YouTube. I don't know if this is related to like pixel art. Maybe you could give us a little bit more information. I can let you know if it's something we can cover in the stream. But I don't really understand what the issue is with resizing and things like that. So if you want to throw some more details in there,
I'll show
I
you
can
guys,
see if it's.
I'll show you guys
something we
next
can
on Thursday. I'll show you guys how to resize artwork as well, because when you do resize this, because it is so small, if I make this bigger, if I want to send this to a printer, for instance, and have it print bigger than a thumbnail, I'm going to have to make this canvas bigger. So I'll show you guys how to do that on Thursday as well. There is a trick to doing like pixel art, and then when you're finished, you can blow it up so that it maintains its resolution without creating all the extra kind of fluffy anti-aliasing that we don't want to have happen.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe that
yes,
can be covered on Thursday.
Yeah, we will go through that for sure.
Cool.
So I've done my foreground mountains on the wrong layer there. So just going to start that again. Here we are. All right, so I've got my background. Pretty happy with kind of how that looks. If I wanted to kind of give it a little bit more atmosphere as well, I can start to look at this and go, all right, let me grab this one. And I'm going to bring in a slightly kind of lighter shade of this particular color and bring it into the kind of pinks. And this will make it look like there's a little bit of, you know, like atmospheric mist, and it'll make it kind of a little bit more interesting to look at in that sense. Again, that's a completely just a stylistic choice that I can kind of do. See what I mean? Like it makes it look like there's like something now behind.
Yeah, you're right. The mist or the fog kind of coming up from the mountains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can kind of do that pretty easily. Like again, depending on how much detail you want to kind of throw in there and how much stuff you want to put in. But I'm pretty happy with kind of how this looks. So that's from our original scene. What I can do as well is, if I want to, I can pop in some stars as well in here. So because we're using pixel art, our stars are going to be pretty simple to do. We're literally just going to do a few kind of dots like this here and there. I can make some bigger ones if I want to as well. And
they're like the easiest stars you've ever had to draw in your life. You're just like,
absolutely, absolutely. Because again, it's like, it's lo-fi, it's that kind of stylized version of. If I want to, I can start to go even bigger still, and then do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then do this kind of thing. Whoops. And then I can add in that, and that's going to be like more of like a twinkling kind of star. So there's a range of different kind of assets that I can use. As you can see, like I've literally got this one, which is just my like, you know, 3x3. This one's just a single. Then I've got like full detail kind of star, and then I can kind of, you know, plonk these in random different places. Yeah, this is kind of like a nice little addition to this. And again, up close, it makes no sense. From a distance, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Next thing I want to show you guys is, as you can see, when I'm kind of at this size, I've got the pixel grid showing up, which is literally telling me where my pixels are, which is super handy when I'm painting other things, because it will make me see where the pixels are going to go and where I'm plonking them. Because as you can see, my brush can go over these lines, but wherever I click is going to go where whichever one I'm most inside of, even though it looks like I'm in the middle of them all. Mathematically, I'm not, so it's just going to stick them wherever it thinks I am most kind of overlapping, which can be a little bit tricky if I don't see this grid. So the problem then comes if I'm looking at this, I've got kind of this like gray mesh all over my thing because my grid is showing. All I need to do here is Command H for hide, and that will hide that grid for me.
Oh, cool.
So it's just a nice kind of easy way to do it. But again, if I'm kind of doing up close kind of detail, having that grid, so I'm like, I know where my pixels are going to go, is going to be pretty important for me to have. So Command H just kind of hides that. If you're in Command H and you've made a selection and you can't see that selection, it is because you are in that particular kind of setting. So Command H will also hide your selections, which can be handy in different settings. But just be aware that if you think you've got a selection going and you can't see it, it's because you've done that particular shortcut there, which is Command H. Right, so I'm pretty happy with how all this is kind of turning out. Now I need to kind of put in some platforms for our little kind of dude to jump around on. And this is where it's going to get kind of fun, because I want to have this kind of repeat pattern. I want to have something that's going to be easy for me to do, and that's going to be easy for my team to kind of build as well. So what I've got is I've pre-prepared this guy here, which is my little pattern. Right?
Oh, it's like a little texture.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a stone pattern, right? And what that looks like, if I switch back, sorry, to my thing here, as you can see, like I've actually gone ahead and finished this. So I've got this, right? So these repeat patterns are literally just me kind of creating the grass and the rocks to get that kind of texture to repeat throughout. And there's a couple of different tricks to be able to do that. So let's have a look at that. So that's my original one. So what I'm going to do is I've got a 32 by 32 pixel square, because I want my pattern to be a square so that it's a tile, basically, right? So let's create a new one from scratch. So Command N opens that up. We go to where it says millimeters. We want that in pixels, and we want 32 by 32, and everything else can just kind of stay as it is. So we got that tiny little dude right there.
It's so small.
Let's zoom in on it. Yeah, it is. Well, 32 pixels, not exactly the height of resolution, but that will kind of help us build this quite easily as well. So I'm going to make a new layer. And let me go back to my tile here and grab this color. Again, trying to keep in line with the themes and colors of what I've kind of done here before. So I'm going to fill that with my color, and I'm going to make a new one. Go back and eyedrop my colors in here, grab the highlight as well while I'm at it, and then I can start painting. Right? So this is me just kind of doing random stones that will kind of feel like they fit with each other quite nicely. Looks a little bit organic. Your brick kind of wall is often just this kind of thing, or like stones will, form so that they kind of line up a little bit and fill the gaps in between one another. So I want to kind of try and get that same shape. But I'm going to have a bit of an issue if I'm doing this just within my square. I'll show you what will happen here. And this is not necessarily a huge deal. It's not going to make your pattern as seamless as you might like. All right? So let's leave that like that. I've filled in my tile nice and neatly. And I'm going to go up here and say edit. And I need to bring these two layers together and do this.
You need to merge them?
I need to merge them so that I've got a selection. Otherwise, it will just do whatever layer you've actually selected onto, and not the ground as well. So it'll only just grab the stones. Then I'm going to go to define as a pattern, and I'm going to call this rocks delete me.
I like that. You're sending yourself a little message in the future.
Yep. And then all I really need to do here is make a new layer, and I can make some selections. So I'm going to make my selection just randomly like this. And I'm going to go to my little adjustment panel. So it's the one that lives in the middle of my layer panel down here.
And if it's a bit small for you guys, it's like a half circle. So
yeah, it's this little like half circle. It's literally the middle icon at the bottom of your layer panel. down here. And I'm just going to click on pattern. And that's going to open up my pattern. By default, it's this kind of like leafy pattern that shows up that you can see kind of just creates a leaf kind of wall, which actually, if I drop it down, kind of makes an interesting pixel art texture. But
it kind of does, doesn't it?
At the moment. I want my little one that I created here before, and I'm going to scale that back up to 800. And there we go. So you can see what it's done is I can see there's a grid here. That's not very seamless. What I want is for some of the stones to kind of overlap that grid so that I do have this kind of seamless pattern where there's not a clear line that's splitting the stones. Like they're all kind of jumbling into each other. And there's a neat little trick to doing that. In Illustrator, there's actually a pattern making kind of thing that you can do that's super helpful, but we don't have that in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to draw just a few rocks in here like so. Again, trying to match up this idea that they're all kind of clicking into each other a little bit. And this is where it's also important that I remember what the dimensions of my canvas were, which was 32 by 32, right? Because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to offset these to work in a slightly different way. So here I'm kind of filling in a little bit, making sure they don't kind of line up. There's no, edges that line up too much. Everything's kind of overlapping itself a little bit.
There's no like straight or horizontal like
edge what I want to avoid
in the negative space
is this, right? I want to avoid having a line that cuts cleanly here or whatever, where it's going to give me a nice line for my eye to pick up on when I make my pattern. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to filter. On my rocks layer here, so my layer 2 is there. I've got that selection. I'm going to go to other, and I'm going to go to offset. And what I want to do here is I want half of 32 because I want to offset this by 50% horizontally and 50% vertically. So that's going to be half of 32, right? So 16 plus 16 plus 16, pixels right, pixels down, we're good to go. We can leave everything else like so. If wraparound isn't ticked by default, it should be, but if it isn't, make sure you tick that. Again, if you're at 64, then you're going to do plus 32 on vertical or horizontal. So it's always nice to have an even number when you're doing a tile like this. And we're going to hit OK. And what's happened here basically is it's pushed the image off to the side, but then repeated it on the other side. Right? So let me show you how that's going to work exactly. I'm going to draw 2 little kind of pink pixels, or a few more. I'll just do 2 here, and I'll do these 2 guys as well. And I'm going to do that one again. So other, offset, we already got 16 by 16, and we've got that all good to go. So that hasn't quite worked out how I wanted, but you can see that my 2 pixels that were split here are now been split up and down. So it's taken that image and cut it right in the middle and kind of repeated it on the other side. And then I can kind of work with my drawing again to just kind of fill the gaps back into this. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I can paint wherever I want in here, because this is the center of my tile. So I can kind of just do whatever I want, making sure that if I do, for instance, go to the edge here, I have to make sure that I match up that edge on the other side. Right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's going to line up, and we're good to go there. And I need to go down here as well. So 2 more there. And I can just do a little bit of here and a little bit there. And yeah, that's pretty good. Now I'm going to put some highlights on that. So a nice easy way to put some highlights, just to give it a little bit of volume, make it look like it's kind of standing out, is I'm going to lock my transparency on that particular layer. So that's this little guy right here. It's this little checkerboard that just says lock. The shortcut for that is just your /. So /, as you can It pops a little lock. It turns this guy on as well. So
I'll occasionally do it accidentally when I'm typing. And
I've actually
I'm like,
discovered
how
this
did that
shortcut
lock?
by accident.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what that does is it means I can, with my blue here, if I paint over there, nothing will happen because it's locked the transparency of this particular layer. So it's only painting on the edges. So it's a good way to kind of put an edge of kind of highlight on that without having to be too careful about, sticking to just that shape without going on the darker blue area as well. So I use this quite often when I'm kind of drawing and putting highlights on stuff, simply because it is just super handy to have.
That's really cool. And hello to everyone that's just joined us. Big bunch of people just joined us. We're doing pixel art with Jeremy Lord. And if you missed some of the stuff before, when you can jump into, we've got part 2 in 2 days as well. So check it out, subscribe to the channel and all that sort of stuff if you're into following cool art.
Yeah. So now I'm putting a shadow on there as well, just again, increase that sense of like volume.
And that's cool. As soon as you zoom out a little bit, it really shows that.
I think that's super important to do that every now and then when you're doing pixel art, is just zoom out to see how it actually looks. So what I can do now is I can add in a little bit of texture in here as well, with some of these guys, and just put in, just a few kind of bits and pieces in here. Another kind of interesting way to do that is to go into my filter and go noise and add noise. And that's going to be quite crazy. So I want to make sure that's on monochromatic, and then I can drop that down a little bit. And you can see like it's quite hectic. But if I was working on something that's meant to be like sandy, it's a really nice way to kind of unflatten the color and give it a bit of texture and graininess without having to actually go in and paint those things in there. It's a little bit hectic for what I need here, so I'm actually quite happy with just kind of creating that myself at this stage, and making a little bit of kind of texture that way. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to save this again, same thing. So take these two guys, duplicate them, smash them together, and then go to edit, find pattern, and call this one rocks. I'll call this one 3 because it is the third one I've done for this. And then I can go back into my layer here, and I can start making my selection, and then go back down to here, pattern, and select my rock. And now you can see that there is no, you can see that it's a repeat pattern, obviously, right? And that's kind of the point. You can see that there's something repeating and over again, but there's no grid like there would be if I was doing this one. That's a clear like delineation of the tile. This one, you can't see a clear square that begins in it. So that's really crucial for this. So let me go ahead and delete this guy, delete pattern. Yep. And I'll keep the other one as well in there. Cool. So what
that's awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to it.
It's a handy thing.
Yeah.
It's a super handy thing to have in there, because it means also the cool thing about this is, as you can see, like if I'm doing this and filling in with a pattern here and going back in and taking my little kind of rock one that I've actually ended up using, is anywhere on that layer that I will now paint, it's created a layer mask with a pattern, right? So you can see that layer mask sitting next to it there. Anywhere I want to add in some more rock, I literally can just paint, and it will paint in a little bit more rock. Or if I want to have this not quite straight edge here, I can come in and give it a little bit of a kind of a roughened edge and like match up to where these rocks kind of sit. Right? So again, like this is not
that's super cool. That's great.
Pixel artists would actually work. Like they would have an edge asset that goes like if it's the middle of the rock and it's the edge of the rock and so on and so forth.
Right.
For me, it's like for me just to kind of making this pixel art illustration, it doesn't have to work for a game.
Yeah.
It's actually super handy to be able to kind of do this and work in a slightly more kind of interesting way. So I can kind of just, really go to town on a lot of this and try and get that kind of slightly more roughened edge, and it will just generate the pattern as I go along, which is super handy to have.
That's super cool. So you can make that like really realistic looking kind of cliff face, and you can cut out the bottom. You probably want to keep the top because we're kind of doing a platformer, a Thor based like platformer game here. But yeah, that makes it super cool.
And if you were super keen, you could also just make another pattern. As you'll see, I'll make a grass pattern in a sec. You could make little kind of like stalactite patterns for like, showing how like maybe there's some like ice coming down from this because it's Asgard or whatever, and it's like, it's Thor. So you could do that if you wanted to. Again, there's a difference in between me just doing this because I'm doing this as an illustration and an actual video game designer building this for his devs to like actually have and use and make it kind of usable. There's a huge difference in between the two. So we're not doing that. We're just kind of creating something that looks cool, that doesn't have to actually work. And that's a huge kind of point of difference.
And can you just remind us, sorry, just as you were going through there, what you're doing to paint it back in and paint it back out? Is there something you're holding down, or are you switching from foreground to background or something?
Because as you can see, I've got that. If I hide that layer mask
that
I've got on my pattern, it's kind of filling in the whole screen. So it doesn't matter where I draw. It's just going to show more pattern because it's there. It exists there, but it's been stuck with a layer mask on top of it. So all I need to do to add in more kind of layer there is I can just paint. If I paint on my layer mask with white, it reveals stuff that's behind it, right? So I've just painted here, so it's revealing that particular section. If I paint with black, it masks it out and it hides that section back out again.
Very cool.
That's it.
Very cool.
So all I really need to do here is start, building my worlds and have that kind of work to my advantage. So this is what I've done here. If I hide these guys, you can see that I've kind of created these slight kind of platforms as a kind of gamer side scroller would kind of look. But I haven't actually gone in and, edited it out a little bit to kind of give it that rough edge, which I can kind of do a little bit later on if I want to, and kind of bring that back in to here as kind of needed. And then I get that nice kind of cool standalone kind of floating kind of platform.
Floating rock thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows why it's just floating there, but that's what a platformer does.
You got to make the floating platform in the sky look realistic.
Yeah, exactly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some grass onto this, right? So what I've got here is you can see that I've got these little kind of grass, and again, that's a repeat pattern, right? So I'm going to go into this guy here, and you can see I've made two separate kind of sets of grass, one that's a little bit easier to handle and another one that's a little bit more like complex. It's got a bit more kind of detail to it. So we're going to do the same thing with our little guy here. So I'm going to hide all of those, make a new layer. I'm going to eyedrop some of the kind of the aqua colors that I've got from that one. And then we're going to make our little pattern here. I'll call this one grass. And so what you'll see some people do at this stage is use use rulers to block off, because we want our grass to match up on both sides, right? Like we want, if I'm going to put a pixel here, I need the pixel to be on the same side everywhere else. So that's just to make sure that it kind of lines up. There's not a kind of a cut that's a bit weird. I don't really kind of bother with that too much. What I would tend to do is just hold down shift and drag a line, and I've got a straight kind of block in there, or you could just make a rectangular selection tool and just fill that in. Yep. And then I can go in and erase stuff from here, right?
Right.
All I need to make sure that I do is if I erase this pixel, I need to erase the pixel on the other side too, right? What I don't want is to have a thing that's going to happen here. Like for instance, if the joinery is on this side, is I've got something like this, and then all of a sudden this happens where the kind of the join goes. That's going to be really horrible and not kind of nice to look at.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I can kind of just go to town and start, painting out random bits of grass. And again, I'm just kind of messing around here. I'm not being too clean. I don't have to worry too much about how this stuff looks. It's just going to be grass. What I do want to avoid, however, is having any really major distinctive features. So let's say that there's like a vine hanging down from this. That's going to be an easy spot it's an easy tell for a repeat pattern because it's something that's very distinctive that's going to stand out. So if I put that in, it's going to be very immediately recognizable as a repeat pattern. So that's probably not something that I'd want to put in. I want to keep it pretty generic and pretty just kind of not boring, but I don't want to put anything kind of too standout-ish in at this stage. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to fill that in like that and switch back to this. And I'm going to lock my layer, which it already is. And then I can put in some highlights on top and I'll put some shadows at the bottom as well. And again, I'm not really kind of too worried about trying to draw blades of grass. I'm just making kind of like a texture. And then we'll grab this guy here and then put some of that at the bottom. So we're just kind of making a little bit of volume and texture in our grass.
Is that happening because you have the lighter color at the top and the darker one down the bottom, a little bit like you did with the rock pattern? You're trying to add a little bit of light, like physics to it?
I'm trying to add a bit of volume to it, yeah? And get this kind of, this look and feel that looks like it's actually got a bit of shadow. And I've added a drop shadow onto that, and I'll show you guys how that works in a sec.
We do only have about a minute or two left for today, so it might be the beginning of the next stream.
Sure. This will probably just take me a sec. So what I'm going to do now in my grass layer, I'm going to save again, same thing, go to edit, define pattern. I'm going to call this one grass, delete. And I'm going to go into my thing here. So it's going to get a little bit funky now because my grass pattern is actually a tile within a tile. So if I do this, what you'll see is it'll actually repeat that a bunch of times within my layer here. Oops, let's go back to this guy and make sure the transparency is on. Otherwise, as you can see, it's going to take the white. So let me do that again. Edit, define, and call this one grass X2. And I'm going to do the same thing and go back into this guy. And now we've got that. But you see it's repeated that pattern a bunch of times over and over again, which is, we don't necessarily want that to happen. So what I'm going to have to do now is actually go in and rasterize this so that it doesn't become a pattern. So rasterize layer, so right click on the actual layer and go to rasterize. So it's no longer a pattern. And now I can get rid of a few of the other ones by using my layer mask in here. I move it around. So I'm going to move that guy to right there. And I can use my layer mask to edit the rest of these guys and move them around. So I'm going to move that guy down to here and so on and so forth.
That's really cool. Hey, I think we're going to have to pause it there. We'll pick up everything back on Thursday. There's obviously so much to chat about, but I don't want to get cut off and I want to make sure that we get to say our goodbyes before we go.
Yeah. So that's basically it. As you can see, I've literally just done everything that I needed to do here. I've added some grass. I put a drop shadow on that. We can kind of cover that next week, but that's the basis of the kind of the world that this is going to happen on. And then next week we can take a look at putting in characters and information about the game into there as well.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks so much, Jeremy. I'm looking forward to Thursday and we'll see you then. See you next
Yep.
time, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.